Hey kids, so chapter 6, I can only film 15 minutes at once, so it ran out just near the end, so I'm going to continue where we left off in the last video. But once again, Wendell was right. The house was full of surprises. The trip, which would have been a 2-minute walk in the bright afternoon, soon became a trek that had Harvey wishing he'd brought a flashlight and a map. The leaves rustled underfoot as though snakes were swarming through them. The trees that had shaded them by day now looked frightful in their nakedness, gaunt and hungry. "Why am I doing this?" he asked himself as he followed Wendell through the darkness. "I'm cold and I'm uncomfortable." He might have added frightened on the list, but he left that thought unsaid. As he was about to suggest they turn back, Wendell pointed up and hissed, "Look!" Harvey looked. Directly overhead, a form was moving silently against the sky, as if it had just launched itself from the eaves of the house. The moon had slunk away behind the roof and shed no light upon this night flyer, so Harvey could only guess as its shape from the stars was blotted out as it sailed. Its wings were wide, but ragged, too ragged to bear it up, he thought. Instead, it seemed to claw at the darkness as it went, as though it was crawling on the very air itself. A glimpse was all Harvey had, then it was gone. "What was that?" he whispered. He got no answer. In the moments he'd taken staring up at the sky, Wendell had disappeared. "Wendell," Harvey whispered, "where are you?" There was still no reply, just the slithering in the leaves and the moan of hungry branches. "I know what you're doing," Harvey said, louder this time, "and you won't scare me that easy. Hear me?" This time there was a reply of sorts. Not words, but a creaking sound from somewhere in the trees. "He's climbing up into the treehouse," Harvey thought, and determined to catch Wendell and scare him back, he followed the sound. Despite the nakedness of the branches, their mesh kept all but a glimmer of starlight from falling on the groves. He slipped his mask down around his neck so as to see a little better. But even as he was nearly blind, and he had to listen out for the sound of Wendell's ascent to guide him, he could still hear the creaks plainly enough, and stumbled in their direction, his arms outstretched to grasp the ladder when he reached it. Now the sound was so loud he was certain he must be standing beneath the tree. He looked up, hoping to catch a glimpse of the trickster, but as he did, something brushed his face. He snatched at it, but it was gone, at least for the moment. Then it came again, brushing his brow from the other side. He snatched at it a second time, then, as it touched him again, caught hold of it. "Got you," he cried. His yell of triumph was followed by a rush of air and the sound of something crashing to the ground. At his side, he jumped, but refused to let go of whatever he was holding. "Wendell," he called. By way of a reply, a flame flared in the darkness behind him, and a firework erupted into a shower of green sparks, its light making its gregarious cavern of the grove. By its flickering light he saw what he held, and he'd seen let out a panicked yammering that had the crows rising from their roosts overhead. It was not a ladder he'd heard creaking, it was a rope. No, not even a rope, a noose. And in his hand the leg of the man hanging from the noose. He let go of it and stumbled backwards, barely suppressing a second shout as his eyes rose to meet the dead man's stare. To judge by his expression, he had died horribly. His tongue lolled from his foamy lips. His veins were so swollen with blood his head looked like a pumpkin. Either that, or it was a pumpkin. A fresh fountain of sparks now burst from the firework, and Harvey saw the truth of the matter. The limb he'd held was a stuffed trouser leg, the body a coat spilling bundles of clothes, that head a mask on a pumpkin, with cream for spittle and eggs for eyes. "Wendell!" he yelled, turning his back on the scene of execution. Wendell was standing on the far side of the firework, his ear-to-ear grin lit by its spitting sparks. He looked like a little demon, fresh from the inferno. And that's a picture. At his side was the ladder he'd come crashing down to get the drama underway. "I warned you," Wendell said, holding up his mask. "I said I was going to be a hangman tonight." "I'll get you back for this," Harvey said, his heart still beating too fast for him to see the funny side of this. "I swear I'll get you back." "You can try," Wendell crowed. The firework was beginning to fizzle out, the shadows around them beginning to deepen again. "Had enough of Halloween for tonight?" he asked. Harvey didn't much like admitting defeat, but he nodded grimly, swearing to himself that when he finally got his revenge, it would be choice. "Smile," Wendell said, as the fountain of sparks dwindled. "We're in the holiday house." The light had almost gone, and even though Harvey was still enraged at Wendell, and had himself been such a sucker, he couldn't let it die away without making peace. "All right," he said, allowing himself a tiny smile. "There'll be other nights." "Always," said Wendell. The reply pleased him. "That's what this place is," he said, and as the light went out, "It's the house of always." Chapter 7, A Present from the Past. There was a Thanksgiving feast awaiting them when they got back into the house. "You look as though you've been here in the wars," Mrs. Griffin remarked when she set eyes on Harvey. "Has Wendell been up to his tricks?" Harvey admitted that he'd fallen for all of them, but there was one that impressed him in particular. "What was that?" said Wendell with a smug grin. "The falling ladder? That was a clever little touch, wasn't it?" "No, not the ladder," said Harvey. "What then?" "The thing in the sky." "Oh, that. Was it a kite?" "That wasn't my doing," Wendell replied. "What was it then?" "I don't know," Wendell said, his smile disappearing. "Better not to ask her." "But I want to know," Harvey insisted, turning to Mrs. Griffin. "It had wings, and I think it flew off the roof." "Then it was a bat," Mrs. Griffin said. "No, this was 100 times bigger than a bat." He spread his arms. "Great, dark wings." Mrs. Griffin frowned as Harvey spoke. "You imagined it," she said. "I did not," Harvey protested. "Why don't you sit down and eat?" "Why don't you just sit down and eat?" Mrs. Griffin replied. "If it wasn't a bat, then it wasn't anything at all." "But Wendell saw it too, didn't you, Wendell?" He looked around at the other boy, who was digging into a steaming plate of turkey and cranberry sauce. "Who cares?" Wendell said, chewing as he spoke. "Just tell her you saw it." Wendell shrugged. "Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It's Halloween night. There's supposed to be boogeymen out there." "But not real ones," said Harvey. "A trick one's thing, but the beast. That beast was real." As he spoke, he realized he was breaking the rule he'd made on the porch. Whether the winged creature was real or not didn't matter. This was a place of illusions. Wouldn't he be happier here if he just stopped questioning what was real and what was not? "Sit down and eat," Mrs. Griffin said again. Harvey shook his head. His appetite had disappeared. He was angry, though he wasn't quite sure at whom. Maybe at Wendell for his shrugs, or at Mrs. Griffin for not believing him, or at himself for being afraid of illusions. Maybe all three. "I'm going up to my room to change," he said, and left the kitchen. He discovered Lulu on the landing, staring out the window. Wind gusted against the glass, reminding Harvey of Rictus's first visit. It wasn't rain the gusts were bringing, however, it was powdery snow. "It'll be Christmas soon," she said. "Will it?" "There'll be presents for everyone. There always are. You should wish for something." "Is that what you're doing?" She shook her head. "No," she said. "I've been here so long, I've got everything I ever wanted. Would you like to see?" Harvey said yes, and she led him up the stairs to her room, which was immense and filled with her treasures. She obviously had a passion for boxes, tiny jewelled boxes, large carved boxes, a box for her a collection of glass balls, a box that played tinkling music, a box into which halved 100 smaller boxes fitted. She also had several families of dolls who sat in blank-faced rows around the walls, but more impressive by far was the house from which the dolls had been exiled. It stood in the middle of the room, 5 feet high from step to chimney top, every detail of brick, slate and sill perfect. "This is where I keep my friends," Lulu said, and opened the front door. 2 bright green lizards came out to greet her, scurrying up her arms onto her shoulders. "The rest are inside," she said. "Take a look." Harvey peered through the windows and found that every perfect room in the house was occupied. There were lizards lounging on the beds, lizards snoozing in the baths, lizards swinging from the chandeliers. He laughed out loud at their antics. "Aren't they fun?" Lulu said. "Great," he replied. "You can come up and play with them any time you want." "Thanks." "They're really, really friendly. They only bite when they're hungry. Here." She plucked one off her shoulder and dropped it into Harvey's hands. It promptly ran up and perched on his head, much to Lulu's amusement. They enjoyed the company of both the lizards and each other for a long while, until Harvey caught a glimpse of his reflection in one of the windows and remembered what a sight he was. "I'd better go and wash," he told Lulu. "I'll see you later." She smiled at him. "I like you, Harvey Swick," she said. Her honesty made him honest. "I like you too," he told her. Then, his expression darkening, he said, "I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." She looked puzzled. "I saw you at the lake," he said. "Did you?" she replied. "I don't remember." "Well, anyway, it's deep. You should be careful. You could slip in and fall in." "I'll be careful," she said as he opened the door. "Oh, and Harvey?" "Yes?" "Don't forget to wish for something." What shall I ask for? He wondered, as he washed the dirt off his face. Something impossible, maybe, to see just how much magic the house possessed. A white tiger, perhaps. A full-sized zeppelin. A ticket to the moon? The answer came from the depths of his memory. He had wished for a present he'd been given and lost a long time ago, a present that his father had made for him, which Mr. Hood, however much he might want to please his new guest, would never be able to duplicate. "The Ark," he murmured. With his face washed and the scratches he had got from the thorns in the thicket worn like war wounds, he headed back downstairs to find that once again the house had performed an extraordinary transformation. A Christmas tree so tall that the star at its summit pricked the ceiling stood in the hallway, the colours of its twinkling lights seeping into every room. There was a smell of chocolate in the air, and the sound of carols being sung. In the living room, Mrs. Griffin was sitting beside a roaring fire with Stew Cat purring on her lap. "Wendell's gone outside," she told Harvey. "There's a scarf and gloves for you by the porch door." Harvey went out onto the porch. The wind was icy, but it was already clearing the snow clouds, leaving the stars to shine down on a perfect white carpet. Not quite perfect. A trail of tracks led down from the house to the spot where Wendell was building a snowman. "Coming out?" he hollered to Harvey, his voice as clear as the bells that were ringing through the crisp air. Harvey shook his head. He was so tired even the snow looked comfortable. "Maybe tomorrow," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow." "Oh, it'll be back tomorrow, won't it?" "Of course," Wendell yelled. "And the night after, and the night after." Harvey went back inside to look at the Christmas tree. Its branches were hung with strings of popcorn and cranberries, with coloured lights and baubles and soldiers in the gleaming silver uniforms. "There's something under there for you," Mrs. Griffin said, standing near the living room door. "I hope it's what you want, sweet." Harvey knelt down and pulled a parcel with his name on it from under the tree. His pulse quickened before he could have even opened it, because he knew from its shape and from the way it rattled that his wish had been answered. He pulled at the string, remembering as he did so how much littler in his hands had been the first time he had held this gift. The paper tore and fell away, and there, shiny and new, was a painted wooden ark. It was a perfect copy of the one his father had made, the same yellow hull, the same orange prow, the same wheelhouse with the same holes in its red roof for the giraffes to put their heads through. The same legged animals, all in their pairs, snug in the hold or peering through the portholes. Dogs, elephants, camels, 2 doves, and all these and a dozen more. And finally the same little Noah with his square white beard, his fat wife complete with apron, How did he know? Harmony murmured. He hadn't intended the question to be heard, much less answered.